Joan Fiddler with the Montgomery County Taxpayers League, and just so that you know, I have never been in the Montgomery County Taxpayers system. I have graduated from there, and I've never ran for a board seat, so I'm pretty open. All right, so I decided to look at the budget. My background, I've been with the federal government. I just retired 5 years ago, and a considerable part of my career was in budget and federal budgeting. So just to introduce you to this budget, incidentally, this thick and this heavy. This is the operating budget presented to the Board of Education. And the budget director for the school is kind enough to give me a paper copy. I told him it's too much flipping through 500 screens, so he gave me this. So, in terms of the budget itself, I think I'll sit down. When one normally looks at a budget, the real secret to a budget is look at the cover letter from the head of the agency. So I decided to look at the cover letter from the superintendent, explaining how much he needed, why he needed it, and the accomplishments, and what he was going to do with the increases. And it was pretty much in the form of most cover letters, so there was nothing there to find that seemed to stand out. The budget is actually, overall, he's asking for $2.28 billion, an increase of $56 million over the current year, which is actually also an addition of 338 FTE. This is an increase of 2.5% from last year. Now, also remember that his budget does not include another $250 million that is given to the school system from the county government. So if you add that together, it's quite considerable. That's actually
Where is that money coming from?
Where
is that money coming from?
Property taxes.
From our property taxes. It's actually coming from the county budget, county government budget. So we are paying for their nurses and their health aides and their resource officers, the policemen in the schools. We are paying for their debt service and so on. And that comes to $260 million. So that's in addition to their regular budget. Now, two major points to think about in this budget overall is it is $17.4 million over the maintenance of effort level. And most important, it does not include any funding for compensation because the unions and the board have not negotiated pay raises as yet. And the reason you need to remember that is if they're already $17 million over the maintenance of effort budget, they're going to be quite a bit over once they add compensation. Then you're going to get into this game. I wonder how they're going to handle it, because then it would show that in order to cover compensation, they have to cut a whole lot of other stuff. And this budget won't show it because it doesn't show. And I was hoping that future budgets would show some table to say, if the pay increases 2%, this is the amount of dollars, and this is what we might have to do. If it's 3%, 4%, 5%, so you have a better idea. Whereas at this point, you don't know. The other thing is, I decided to look at his cover letter to see if, in fact, he had any redirections from programs, or there were any reductions in current programs. He does have some redirections, and he's using actually the surplus, which is left over from this year, to hire 30 English and math teachers to go in for some teacher training and for what he calls community partnerships. So were there any reductions made? And I looked. Now mind you, this is a $2.2 billion budget. Yeah, there were reductions of $3 million and a reduction of 22 FTE, what they call efficiencies and reductions. It wasn't clear in the letter what these efficiencies were and reductions, but $3 million is less than 0.1% of the entire budget. I looked at the accomplishments, and he very well, mentioned what the accomplishments were, which is more people are taking AP courses, and generally the students are doing well. There were no references to any major cuts other than the $3 million. So then I decided to look at the format to see if, in fact, it was user-friendly to someone who is not in the school system. I would say generally it is chock full of information. The question is the information, and I'm being a bit sarcastic here, is it meant to obfuscate or to elucidate? And I wasn't quite sure what we were supposed to do in many, many instances. And there's a lot of jargon. If you're not an educational policy maker, you will actually might have to tear your hair out while you're going through some of these pages. Does this budget lend itself to analysis? I looked at it and I would say to some extent it does because it gives us quite a few numbers. But then I decided to look at the Fairfax County Public School budget that they have presented to their Board of Supervisors. And I found their budget was easier to read. And I don't know if I'm biased or not, but I was reading it and I noticed that it was a lot easier to read and easier to analyze. So one small example, for instance, without going into detail, is when I looked at the organizational charts for the major organizations within the school system, they don't show in one chart how much what the total dollars are and the total FTEs, and for each of the divisions and departments. And when I do my piece, I'll show it to you, because it gives you a better idea and it puts it in context when you're trying to analyze the budget. And that's missing, but I'm sure they can fix it. Were there any linkages to the strategic plan? No. In fact, it was really funny. I saw some reference to a strategic plan in the chapter of the budget I was looking at, and all it consisted of was describing the organizational structure of that particular office. So, but I was told the strategic plan is a separate document. Now, when you don't link a budget to a strategic plan and vice versa, then the document loses a lot of its value. I'm trying to be as diplomatic in my phraseology. Okay, performance measures. Next, I looked at performance measures. Performance measures are absolutely essential because then you know what your budget is buying you. The performance measures were very mixed. In general, they were outputs and they were not outcomes. So again, other people I'm sure will explain that to you. But I found that, why do I need to know how many teacher training sessions were attended? What I'd like to know is what was the outcome of the session. Did it actually advance what it was supposed to do? So most of them are outputs. I would really hope that next year, when they have a performance measure, they can call it output or outcome. And then we would have a better idea. Yes, another thing is they don't use absolute numbers. So they will say a certain percentage of X happened. Now a percentage based, what's the base? And what is the percentage based on what? And what are the absolute numbers? So I would much rather use absolute numbers and then use a percentage if they so prefer. I've been told all along that the MCPS budget goes through a zero-based budgeting exercise. Now, you must all be familiar with the term zero-based budgeting, but if you're not, let me explain it to you. A zero-based budget is when you look at, for instance, they would look at their current budget, and they would not add to it. That would be called incremental budgeting. They would look at each line item or each organization and say, well, we did this way last year, and this is how much we paid for it. Should we be doing the same thing? Should we be funding it less, funding it more? What are our outcomes? I don't see any evidence of zero-based budgeting in this entire document. Maybe they've done it and they have another document that's not available to the public, but it's not obvious here. This is definitely a case of incremental budgeting, not zero-based budgeting. And the most ironic thing of all is, if you think of the makings of effort law, there's no way that it doesn't encourage you to do zero-based budgeting. All it encourages you to do incremental budgeting, because it takes your current budget, then it takes the number of new students, multiplies per pupil costs, and adds it to the current budget. That is the worst or purest form of incremental budgeting that I can think of. And finally, I decided I needed to look at this budget in context. And so I said, so who can I compare this budget to? So I decided to use the one county that every political leader in Montgomery County gets very mad at. It's called the F word, Fairfax County. So I looked at Fairfax County because I looked at their budget, and I've just picked out numbers which are actual even Steven, meaning that they are fair and accurate comparisons. I did not pick numbers here for which you could actually maybe have different definitions. So to give you an idea, this is based on their proposed 15 budget and our proposed 15 budget. The enrollment they're predicting in Fairfax County is for 188,000 students. I'm rounding the numbers. Ours is 154,000 students. They are quite a bit larger than we are. I looked at the percentages of the students they have in special ed in Fairfax County. It's 13.7%. In Montgomery County, it's 13.3%. For Montgomery County, the numbers I have are for 2013. whereas these numbers are for 2014. For English as a second language, 15.4% of their students are in that program, and ours are 13.6%. And this is from our budget book, and I was surprised because I've been hearing quite differently. However, in the one area where farms, you've all heard of free and reduced meals program, in Fairfax County, 28% of their students are on the program, and we are higher, we are 33%. And that I got right out of our budget. So how many total employees do they have in Fairfax County? They have 23,513 to be exact, and we have 21,853. So there's a difference, and they have many, many more students. The total budget request for Fairfax County for fiscal 15 is $2.5 million. Our
Billion.
total budget request is billion. I'm so sorry. Ooh, that was really a slip of the tongue. It was a horrible budgetary Freudian slip. So in Fairfax County, the total budget request is $2.5 billion. In Montgomery County, is $2.3 billion. Now, this was an interesting thing. The budget director of the schools directed me to a document called the Washington Area Board of Education, WABE, I think it's called, that's how it's pronounced. And they actually do comparisons of a whole lot of factors across all the school systems in the region. And this is accepted by all the students, by all the bureaucrats. So the percentage of management positions in Fairfax County is 0.7%. In Montgomery County, it's 1.4%. Enrollment for growth enrollment in Fairfax County for this next year will be 3,369 is their projection. For Montgomery County is 2,824. So they are growing at we're going to have many more students.
What was the growth? What was Fairfax County's growth?
Fairfax is 3,369, and for us is 2,824. So because of the growth in enrollment, Fairfax County has asked for $25.8 million, but Montgomery County, we're number one, we've asked for $56.4 million. And they've asked for 368 additional FTE, and we've asked for 338 additional FTE. Now, this is the final number, is from the Washington Area Board of Education, and I was surprised to see it was this high. The per pupil costs for 2014, and this is according to WABE, for Fairfax County was $13,472. And the number they published for Montgomery County is much higher than I thought. It's $15,326. I thought that seemed a bit high, but all I would say is WABE is comparing apples with apples and oranges and oranges, and they're not mixing the two up.
And we've got all those administrators.
But they're very good at what they do. And I'll be talking about them later. So that's all, I believe that's all I have to say as an introduction to the budget.
County Taxpayers. And I should have known to bring a thumb drive with this material, but it's all condensed on one page and it's working its way around. There it goes. I'm going to talk about Chapter 1, which, as it turns out, is the meat and potatoes chapter. It's always nice to have a book that starts with meat and potatoes. You don't have to wait for all the development of the characters and the plot and the rest of it. This chapter deals with elementary, middle school, and high school education. The schools and the teachers and the costs thereof. And I spoke to this chapter last year in our first meeting on school system budget. And so I tried to sharpen my focus this year, but I found myself coming up with many of the same findings and conclusions. And I'd like to share a couple with you at first. My initial observations, Joan did, I think, an excellent summary of the budget and its approach. And my first observation has to do with strategies. And I think Joan made the point that if you don't link the budget to strategies, you don't know what the budget does for you. A budget's an operating plan, speaking as an accountant. A budget's an operating plan, and it tells you how you're going to implement strategies, how much you're going to spend to reduce the gap or the achievement gap, how much you're going to spend to implement Common Core standards, how much you're going to spend to improve vocational education, et cetera, et cetera. In fact, if you look at the strategic plan document, there's hundreds of strategies. And it's in the budget where you learn whether or not those strategies are funded. It's in the budget document where you learn that they might be underfunded. It's in the budget document where you learn that they might be overfunded. But we learn none of those things in this budget document. Now, I'm an accountant, so I'm a professional skeptic, and Bob is a peer of mine. We're all in the same fraternity. So if I get a little too negative, stop me, because there's some good stories and some good news in this year's budget. And speaking to strategies, just in June, the school system released an interim update to its strategic plan to deal with the achievement gap. And that was a wonderful step forward. A courageous step, I might say, by the school superintendent. In 2008, the school system responded to the county council's report on the achievement gap and the consortiums that are part of the East County effort to bring the achievement gap under control by saying, you know, it's not our strategies, it's poverty. And we cannot change poverty. And they held firm to that position. Now, this was kind of the swan song for Jerry Reese. And so it was kind of late in the game for him to change his tune. However, we heard the same under the new superintendent for years and years. And now, under the pressure of a newly released county council report last spring on the achievement gap, the school system re-examined its strategies and concluded, you know, in order to help kids learn that are way behind, that's socially promoted year after year, we might have to do individual lesson plans and interventions that focus on individual kids. And they came up with a strategy last June that said we're going to have innovation schools where we're going to learn all about how to do interventions correctly. And they are beginning to roll that out this school year. So that's the good news. But I would say in general, my first observation is I could only find 15% of the money tied to the budget. And I did that by going into the organization charts for elementary schools, middle schools, and high schools and looking for how people were classified. I could only link 15% of the people to strategies. Now, that doesn't say that 85% of the budget's non-strategic. However, it is disturbing when the school system's own effort at trying to link the budget to strategies, which is Table 1A. For those of you that want to get into the appendices, Table 1A is better than any narrative or rhetoric that you'll ever hear on this budget. It condenses in one page the budget. And it speaks to many of the things that Joan said. In particular, it has 20 items called Strategic Priority Enhancements. And for those 20 items, it shows how many new FTEs are proposed in the budget and how much money is proposed in the budget for those 20 items. There are things like adding psychologists, providing support to English language learners, middle school leadership, support for project-based learning at Wheaton High School, alternative programming design, grade 5 to 6, compacted math teachers, which sounds like something we do in our kitchen, but I know it's not that, it's something else. Expansion of innovation schools. So the problem I have with this is, one, it's only incremental. Speaking to, this goes back to Joan's point, that the narrative and the numbers of the budget are really incremental. They don't ever examine the base, the $2 billion, what's in there. And so all you know about these 20 or so strategies, and they're really chunks of strategies. When we talked to Larry Bowers 2 months ago, Larry said that, well, he had to kind of condense the hundreds of strategies into 20 mega strategies in order to present it. So they're chunks, and they don't relate directly to the strategic plan because they're chunked up. And secondly, they're just incremental. But I do recommend Table 1A. It tells a story, and it had 25% of the addition to the budget attributed to strategies. So the school system does better than me. I only had 15%. But that would say that 75% of the money is non-strategic. That means it's just doing stuff the way we've always done it because that's the way we've always done it. Okay, so I'm getting negative. I know somebody didn't want to hear that. Let me just keep moving on with my observations. Productivity. There is no benchmark data or productivity data, as I call it, to justify costs. So for example, one new strategy is to take this wonderful program at Kennedy, and it's Kennedy High School and its cluster of middle schools and elementary schools. It's a combined health program for parents and students, and so it says social programs, counseling, et cetera, for everybody in that community. And the county, not the school system, is paying for most of it, although the school system interfaces with the county to make it work, and it's spending millions on its own. So we have this wonderful program. It's been running 5 years. We have no data on whether it's working or not. There have been no proclaimed performance measures as to how you would measure success for it. But we're going to expand it nonetheless, and we're expanding it to the weekend cluster at a significant cost. And it's one of those things, it sounds great. Give kids health care, make sure they eat right, make sure that all of the issues in their family and in their community are dealt with properly, and they're going to be better students. But there's no data to show that that's true, but we're spending money on it anyway. Number three, third observation deals with goals. The number one goal, as the school board says, is closing the achievement gap. But we haven't quantified targets. Now, this was a to-do item from last June. Remember I said that we did a mid-year updated strategic plan to address the achievement gap. And it has a lot of great ideas in it, where you go into individual schools with a lot of help at the individual student level and try and improve student performance. But we have no goals. We have 7 at last count performance measures, which is about 6 more than I think you need. And we haven't set targets. So, as Joan said in her opening remarks about performance measures, if you don't know how much you want to close the gap, then you don't know how much money you should spend to close the gap. Does that make sense? So that's a problem with the budget. Salaries, number 4. Our teachers are paid 20% more than Howard and Fairfax County. Excellent school systems in Howard and Fairfax County.
How much was that, I'm sorry?
20%. It was 15% until last year. And thankfully, at this point, there aren't any proposed salary increases.
We don't know that.
But there are negotiations pending.
That's right.
Wasn't there going to be a $17 million decrease in salaries to make up for the deficit?
Would that be interesting? I do have some good news along those lines, though. We had an enormous number of boomers who taught in elementary schools retire last year, and they were expensive. And they've been replaced with less expensive Generation X's, or whatever my kids are called. And so we saved some money there. Overhead, number 5. Direct overhead in the schools that when you go in a building includes stuff like administrators. There aren't many of them, but they're overhead. And also some folks that you see every once in a while, although the students don't see them very often. They're called counselors and media specialists. And when you add the administrators, counselors, and media specialists up, you get a big chunk of overhead in the school system budget, which I'm about to get to. That's about 19%. Gap closing and increases, number 6 on the observations. The strategic plan in June called for innovation schools at plus. The budget increase included 40 new elementary school teachers and 15 new high school teachers to address closing the gap. For some reason, and this is, again, the incremental approach. Last year, there was a bump in the middle school teachers to address the gap, but you don't see that in this budget because it only talks about changes from last year. 7, enrollment increases. Joan spoke to this. It's mostly in the elementary schools, but that makes sense because that's 6th grade, right? That's half of the action. And there's a significant increase in the middle schools as well. The budget increases 88 elementary school teachers and 40 middle school teachers to deal with enrollment increases. Now, you might add that up and say, that's about 130. But there are 320 new teachers. So what are the other teachers about? We're going to get to that right now. So if you look at the organization, we have elementary, middle, and high schools. And the first column of numbers that you see there is what I call nominal FTEs. These are teachers or administrators or others that I can't link to strategies. And they total among elementary, middle, and high schools about 10,500. That's 85% of the budget. To the right of that, the second column is strategic FTEs. These are the teachers and administrators that I could link to strategies. And you'll see that that was about 15% of the budget, or about 1,828 folks. The total number of FTEs in this budget, this is over half the budget we're talking about, folks, is 12,359, of which 9,221 are teachers. That's 75%. And that's how we get to overhead, the far right-hand column. And it's significant, but there's a very important category of folks that I want to talk about, para-educators. This is how we're going to close the gap. We cannot afford teachers. They're too expensive. So we're hiring para-educators, and have been doing this for years, at an increasing rate to individualize the instruction in our schools for kids that need help. This year, we're increasing the number of para-educators, and I'm going to get to that in a second. But I wanted to bring that to your attention. This is a workforce of 803 folks. Okay, to the numbers. In this year's budget, and this budget's kind of funny. We've been doing this every year. We write a budget that excludes federal and state money. So you don't really find out how federal and state money is spent in this budget. You have to do a lot of research, but I'm going to walk you through that. The total budget for elementary, middle, and high school is $920 million, or about half of the total request, which is an increase of $16 million. Not a very significant increase. Salaries and wages increased nominally only $10 million, and that's largely step increases. And if you look at that, that's for 239 new teachers, and that excludes the federal teachers. There's about 100 federally funded teachers. And you see the average salaries in the counts. Our teachers at about $81,000 are 20% higher than teachers in Fairfax and Howard County that are paid in the high 60s, $68,000. You see a number of administrators and back office folks, but you see a lot of support services. And these are the building maintenance no, excuse me, that's not building maintenance. I'm going to come back to that. Contracts have held pretty much low. There's about $3 million for contracts. That's up 20%, and that includes work on accounting systems and consultants. Supplies are up 24%. Some of this is due to enrollment increases. But a large chunk of that, $3 million, is for these Promethean boards. Did I say that right?
Yeah.
That are being used to complement the Common Core standards implementation. There's a small increase in other, and the equipment is in there as well. Oh, tablets, that's the item under supplies. Promethean boards are here under equipment. Issues, performance. We used to call them the red zone. Jerry Weiss popularized that term. This is East County. It's now called focus schools. They're the same thing. Teachers in East County, red zone focus schools, are paid 4% less than teachers in West County, Queens County. And our kids in the East County have lower math and reading scores, minus 12%, minus 5% compared to green zone. Sounds crazy. You would think you'd pay teachers that are working hard and trying to close the gap more.
No, they're the young ones, the new hires.
Well, that's why, because we pay based on experience or seniority, not based on performance. New incentives, however, have been introduced in this budget. Something positive. We recognize that's a problem. So in order to keep what we call exemplary teachers in the red zone, we've come up with $800,000 in this budget to help 250 exemplary teachers stay in the red zone. That works out to about $2,000 per teacher, which is a lot of money for a teacher. And there are also school improvement grants in that. But this accounts for about 5% of the red zone teachers that would be incentivized to stay in the red zone. The majority leave, the good ones leave year after year to the green zone because we actually promote them. We encourage them, we don't discourage them, we encourage them to go to schools in the green zone where they work shorter days and have less headaches in the class. Yes, ma'am?
Your financial incentive is to get the good teachers who are already there to stay. How about an incentive to get good teachers from the green zone to move over to the red zone?
Yes.
Not enough money for that?
It hasn't been done yet.
Okay.
We've promoted that idea, but it hasn't been done yet, and I would encourage you to think about how we can sell that idea.
And the teachers union is very much against it. I've been talking to them for 7 years about it, and they are very much against that. They say it doesn't work. It's called combat pay.
Well, but I know that it's a more complex issue, so I don't want to minimize it. We do approach the school system as a one school system. That is, we treat green zone schools and red zone schools the same. And perhaps we need a differentiated strategy. Yes, sir.
I just want us to be careful on how we define good teachers versus bad teachers. It's not highly correlated with how much they're paid. Some of the young teachers are by far, I've been in the school system for 8 years as a teacher, and I went backwards from green to red to deep red to unbelievably deep red as I moved towards DC, to areas where people were being in night fights and things like that. You need different skills as you go into that, which may not be the guy who can do the calculus problem fast and should be teaching calculus, but the one who gets kids who have never sat still in a classroom to sit still. The second thing is some of the youngest teachers are the best teachers and maybe being paid less. So to see that 4% lower may not mean that there are better teachers in the green schools and in the red schools. It could be the older teachers. It definitely means the older. But we got to be careful in how we define what is a good teacher and how we think about it.
Second issue is achievement gap related. We had an achievement gap report come out last spring from the County Council's Office of Legislative Oversight. Showed that the gap was continuing. A new set of strategies outlined in June, but we're still developing performance targets, trying to figure out how fast we should close the gap. And without that, it's hard to come up with a budget. Yes, sir.
I was just going to ask, it says down here that Green Zone still has exemplary teachers and through free agency. What do you mean by that?
Teachers can move freely from school to school. And many red zone teachers get fed up with the disruption in their classrooms and the long days that they have to work to help kids who've been socially promoted into their class achieve and perform at grade and move to the green zone. And I spent 10 years at Einstein High School. I can tell you, we lost a lot of teachers to that. I'm over budget. Okay, I'll wrap up. Budget. You're over budget. Common Core. Performance measures. We have a lot of performance measures, but so many of them, AP, SAT, Algebra 2, don't apply to the kids that have achievement gap problems because they don't participate in those courses or tests. Case in point, most of the kids who are on farms take the ACT, they don't take the SAT. And yet our leaders in the county and our school board members only talk about the SAT exam because it's become the gold standard. And one of the reasons why we do so well on the SAT exam as a county, when you look at averages, and as an accountant I tell you beware of averages, is because only the high-performing kids take the SAT. Eligibility and ACT scores are still not shown in schools at a glance, even though these are performance measures that we introduced as part of the strategy rollout last June. Common Core. It's widely accepted that the Common Core will not improve the achievement gap. It's important, however, to improve in regular classes and in the STEM classes, math and science. And we're spending money on it. And incrementally, we spent money in last year's budget and the year before. This year, we're adding money for the Promethean boards. We're adding teachers at the elementary school and high school level. There's training and curriculum development, but no performance targets. So what does it mean to be competitive on a global basis, if that's what Common Core promises? And how do we know when we achieve it? There are apparently 11 states that are slowing or dropping implementation of Common Core, some of whom have said it's because we think closing the achievement gaps is not important. Consortium report. This is my last comment. It's overdue. The County Council's Office of Legislative Oversight has been working on an update to the 2008 report to look at whether or not the Down County and Northeast consortiums are working. 2008, the report concluded they weren't. They hadn't achieved integration objectives, they hadn't improved student performance. That report should be out early next month. I encourage you all to look at it, and it should contribute to next year's budget discussion. All right.
Thanks.
Connie, and an MCPS parent as of September. Some of you may have seen or heard me on Twitter or Facebook. I have Chapter 2, which is the Office of School Support and Improvement. And this particular department, and you're going to have to excuse me, this is my first time being here. So I'm a journalist by trade, but this is totally out of my wheelhouse. The Office of School Support and Improvement is charged with helping the schools, principals and the administrators in the schools do a better job for our kids, training our principals and administrators, new teachers, and so forth, and engaging with parents. And I'm going to try not to have a snarky remark about that. This particular office has a total of 141 personnel positions, administrative, professional, and support. They're requesting $12,442,789 for 2014 for salaries and wages, and that's down about $231,000 from 2013. With contracting, travel, and other administrative salaries, they're seeking a total of $15,820,429 for the department for 2014, and that's down almost $150,000 from the previous fiscal year. The Office of the Deputy Superintendent is requesting $9.7 million, which is down about $178,000 from the year before. That figure includes $10,344 for consultants and $65,290 for other contractors, unspecified. And it includes $125,961 for supplies and media, which includes textbooks and instructional materials. And that basically reflects no change from the previous budget year. The Office of Professional Development and School Support is requesting $2.6 million, which is an increase of about $50,000 over 2013. And that request includes $119,787 for other contractual services, which is an increase over the 2013 budget year. And it also includes a request for $19,000 for instructional materials, which is an increase of $10,000 over the year before. One of the observations that I made as I was going through this particular budget is he talked a lot about Common Core and sort of and whether or not Common Core was really being addressed in this budget. And one of the things that I noticed particularly here where the training is supposed to happen, is there was really no mention of exactly what dollars were going towards training the teachers and the administrators in how to implement Common Core, which, you know, to me seems to be fairly important since, you know, this is a huge part of the curriculum now. I know one of the things that, you know, I've just heard anecdotally, for example, we were talking about the expenditures for Promethean boards, was that there's a fair number of teachers who don't know how to use the Promethean boards that they have that's supposed to be working towards implementing Common Core. So it seems to me that there's a huge gap, an information gap in this particular budget document. So, you know, maybe they'll rectify it next year, who knows. So, thank you for listening.
Which is the Office of Teaching, Learning, and Programs, the Office of the Deputy Superintendent for Teaching, Learning, and Programs. And they've got, in the current budget, there's a staff of 8 people, and they're asking for an increase to 9 people. So in 2013, they had 5 staff members, and in 2014, they increased it by 8, and now they want to increase by 1 position to 9. And the total budget that they're requesting is $1,069,352. And when I went through it to try to figure out what the performance outcomes were and so forth, it is very kind of squishy language, and it says OTLP leads and directs the instructional priorities of MCPS grounded in an organizational culture of respect. So it's unclear specifically, and then they have a section on accomplishments and initiatives, but again, there really are not what Joan had talked about really performance-based outcomes. That they launched, for example, the Interventions Network in the fall of 2013, and it said the initial network comprised 11 schools with more schools to be added. So they don't have a projection about how many additional schools, for example, they plan to add to the program. They've also overseen the development of a new accountability system and preparing the school system for the new Partnership for Assessment of Readiness for College and Careers Assessments. And I believe that's the PARC system that has been in the paper lately, that Florida was managing this program and decided not to, and then Maryland stepped up. I believe the governor or the State Board of Education stepped up and said that Maryland would take over this. So this office sounds like they're the ones that are going to be doing aligning for that. But again, like I said, a lot of it is this sort of planning language, but we don't have real measurements and comparisons between the amount of money that's being spent in these different pots and what the specific outcome is. Not that you always reach your outcome at the end of the year in terms of planning, but that we don't have numbers in terms of what their accomplishments, what they're projecting. So that's what I
Fortunate enough to get the most interesting chapter, Office of Curriculum and Instructional Programs. And let me tell you, don't ever read this if you want to keep your marriages alive. It is one of the most boring chapters that I could ever come across. And I think the reason is, I don't know if they definitely mean to obfuscate or if this is the way they normally write in the school systems. So what's been handed out right now is just some stuff. One of them will give an overview of the entire office, which is headed by the Associate Superintendent. And as you get it, you will notice that, do you have it? If you look at the organizational chart, which says overview, you notice that the total budget for this particular part of the budget is $106.8 million, and it has 1,173 FTEs. I was quite shocked when I saw that high number of FTEs, and then I looked further, and fortunately, about 899 of those FTEs are school-based, because it didn't make sense that they have so many in this program. So I decided to look at each portion of this. So let's first look at the overview. The front office has $765,000, that should be a comma after that, with 6 FTE, and it has 3 different departments under the associate superintendent. And you notice the huge difference in budgets. And incidentally, can you imagine a department of enriched and innovative programs? I almost held my breath when I said that. I would think most programs would be enriched and innovative in the school system. Anyway, they have $7.7 million with 46 FTE. Then the Department of Curriculum and Instruction has $7.2 million with 65 FTE. But the biggie is the Department of Instructional Programs. It has $91 million with over 1,000 FTE. Again, most of those FTEs are actually school-based. And the reason I showed you that first was we can then look at the next page, which basically tells you what is the various divisions under each of those offices. And if you flip the page over, you will get the summary of resources for that entire office by object class. So if you're interested in looking at object class at some point, this will give you a breakdown. But I don't have very much time, so I'm going to basically give you an overview of this. So I decided to look at the mission statements for every single one of these organizations. And you'd be surprised that the mission statement is very similar, except they have a different audience for each one. They are either leading, developing, implementing, or coordinating and doing community outreach. Now, in the Office of the Associate Superintendent, to give you an idea, here's the mission statement. It's to lead the development and implementation of innovative curriculum and instructional programs and services that promote academic excellence, creative problem solving, and social and emotional learning, and ensure equitable readiness for college and career readiness. This is a mission statement. As far as I'm concerned, never in budgeting have I seen mission statements like the one I see in this book. Because not only do they give you a mission statement, they tell you how they're going to do it and why. The how and why should be in the objectives, and it should be in the other portion of the budget. So I looked at their performance measures for the Office of the Associate Superintendent. 2 performance measures. Will monitor performance. Second, will develop action plan. That's it. Those are the performance measures. Okay, then I decided to look at the Department of Enriched and Innovative Programs, and I thought I'd be thrilled by this because they're enriching and innovating. So, what is their mission? It's to support, develop, implement, monitor programs that enhance and accelerate instruction for all students. It's much longer, but we don't have time. So what do they do mostly? They look at career and post-secondary partnerships, honors, executive leadership programs, pathway to graduation, etc. Performance measures. Each team will collect, analyze, and use feedback from 100% of community informational meetings. That means the person goes to a meeting, check, so 100% is their goal. So you go to a meeting and you met your goal, okay? The second one was increase the number of students who attain industry certifications. Now that is a good measure because it is an outcome. However, they said 70%. I have no idea as to what the base is and what the improvement is. So that's a problem there. Then we get to accelerated and enriched instruction, which is different from enriched and innovative programs. So the reason I'm pointing this out to you is because, to me, there's a lot of repetition. And while I was going through this, I noticed that a lot of people seem to be doing the same things at pretty high grades. So Department of Accelerated and Enriched Instruction, their performance measures were percentage of school staff members who reported that professional training met or exceeded their expectations. This is a performance measure. Naturally, a teacher is going to professional training will say, yeah, fine. So it's 100%. The other one was the number of students who complete the IB diploma program. Good performance measure because we have the number of students. They said that there were going to be 400 in 2015, which looks like a good number, but I have no idea as to what the total number is. Then they have a division of consortia, choice, and application program services. I'm not going to bore you, but a lot of things they do are with highly gifted and magnet programs, same as before. However, their performance measures are number of students and families receiving adequate information about the choice process. That is a performance measure. Okay, I'm going to skip through. When I looked at this, I noticed that the last 2 organizational units could easily be combined with the savings at the supervisory level because the mission is very similar. I have a feeling they were created to give jobs to people, but that's my personal opinion. Department of Curriculum Instruction was the next one, and their mission is just, again, support schools in raising student achievement by providing research-based curriculum, etc. For that, the performance measure, but this was a very interesting one, was the number of revised or new secondary courses in a curriculum. I suppose that's good. However, this department is headed by a director. There are then 2 directors below that, and under the 2 directors are 9 supervisors, and some of these supervisors, one of them supervises half of a secretary. When I looked at that, I said, you know, I really need to go to work for the school system. I would never have supervisory managerial headaches when I worked for the federal government if I knew you could supervise half a person and be a supervisor. The other supervisor, they supervise between 3 and 5 people. So it looked as though each of the supervisors were jobs that had been created which could easily be consolidated and could save money. Then here's the big one, the Department of Instruction Programs. Now this is an important one because they deal with Title I, No Child Left Behind, Head Start, and English as a second language. But in this program, which is important, they also have outdoor environmental programs and a school library program. Now, I'm not quite sure how it fits in, but who am I to reason why? So one of the performance measures is to use an online assessment tool which will increase students' mean scores in the area of information literacy, 67%. I'm thinking 67 is odd, but you have 60, 65, 70, 75 again. I don't know what the base is. So I'm going to skip through because I'm taking too much time, but this area is important. They deal with Title I programs, early childhood programs, pre-kindergarten, and division of second language. Now, one of the things I will end with this before I get too ironic and sarcastic, and that is in the division of ESOL and bilingual programs, I looked at their performance measures. First performance measure, the percentage of ESOL students progressing towards English language efficiency. That's measured. Followed by percentage of ESOL students achieving English language proficiency. Now, I don't know how they get progressing towards, I can see how they could achieve. However, in progressing towards, it's 56%, and in achieving, it's just 13%. So with that, I'll leave you with Chapter 4, the Office of Curriculum and
I've got the thumb drive, but I was working on 2 proposals that had to be done by 6 o'clock tonight, so. And they're all Montgomery County government employers, DOE and NOAA, so Silver Spring and Germantown. I have Chapter 5, which is probably one of the larger chapters. It's about 80, 90 pages. Huge amount of budget, 330 million proposed next year. The interesting thing about it is 330, if you can find in any part of Chapter 5 how many students are actually served, then you're a better reader than I am, because I did not find it. I actually had to go to the state to find out how many children were served under under their classification. And the state reported last year 17,503 students. Now, if you go back to one of their the appendixes, you can assume, based on that, you can assume there's 450 student growth. And that's the reason why you need to know that is they're planning to add about 83 to 85 resources, depending on who you talk to. And by the way, one of the things I tried to do was go through the various, elements and then add it up to the flow, and it didn't do such. So it's one of the things also that, as an accountant, you like to take in time, can't do that with this budget. But the reality of it is it's an increase of $10 million over where it was last year. This is everything that anybody that has an IEP, K through 12, and all throughout the measurements, the biggest measurement is moving toward the home school model. And one of the things, they were supposed to go to 62%, and they've exceeded that. So I'm not going to talk about the education, but that's how the whole plan is to go to the homeschool model. The increase in students is primarily due to early intervention, pre-K, that's now being done, and then now they're going actually into, this is the first, I think they're going into the first year of actually entering the school system. So those are the type of things that you need to know about with a huge budget like this. I'm not going to go into all of the, education scenarios. I will say that it was the first time I've ever done a budget where 13% of it was listed as miscellaneous stuff. Turns out it's not really miscellaneous. The way the state says it. It turns out most of that is private placements for the amount of students that do not go to Montgomery County Public Schools, but we send through other school systems. And it's an interesting, scenario. They're going to grow. If you look at the $10 million, $2 million is for that area. $1 million is for expected tuition increases, 2.5%, which would be consistent with our budget. And the other one is for adding 23 students. That would be $1.03 million, about $46,000 a year is budgeted for that. So that gives you an idea that they're not inexpensive when you're going to these type of scenarios.
If I can just interject, I was told by Larry Bowers that half of the transportation budget for the school system is for special ed kids.
It may be for special ed, but fortunately it's not in that chapter 5.
Yeah.
It's one of the things I will say, all transportation costs appear in the trans chapter and not included here. That's not actually always true either, because there's an interesting way that's accounted for. And for example, if I have a child that's home model, they may say that it's a special ed bus. So it's not exactly where it is. It's not good because every one of the special education buses is required to have both a bus driver and a support person there. They're smaller buses, they don't handle a lot of students. How do I know that? Because my son's been on a bus for 5 years.
Can I ask a question about that? We see that Fairfax County sent a quantity of students to Ivy Mount School, which is right in our neighborhood. They use small little vehicles. Montgomery County uses huge vehicles. DC Public Schools uses smaller vehicles. Arlington County uses large vehicles. Prince George's County uses large vehicles. And part of the problem is they use 7 Locks Road as basically a storage place because we have so many buses coming every day that they can't even get into the parking lot of the school. If we could just have some method of just stabilizing the number of buses that come in, or asking even DC, instead of using like 15 buses, can we put the kids on 5 buses?
Yeah.
We spend an enormous amount of money on all the different buses coming to all the schools, not only Montgomery County, but Fairfax County seems to use small little vans, which seem to be far more efficient for transporting 1 or 2 students.
So, if we're looking at where did the budget increases come, it's come from population increases, according to everything you read, into this budget section. It's, about 5 to 6 million. The oddball thing that they talk about is that they have $1 million in insurance employee benefits. There is nothing that's going to go down. It's a savings. I would have broadcast it. There is nothing in there that tells you what cost. So, thrilled that it is. It used to be when I used to work with a former head of budget, that was usually, and I could say it usually was, and was usually the self-insured funds where we assumed the prior year and didn't spend it, so that it reduces it the next year proportionally. But you can't find a lot of the details, which is what you would have hoped to be able to find on the major items and tie it back. And the interesting one that I'm a little bit worried about, and this is something that we should be thinking about when we get grants. There was a program, and it's just funded, it's called IDEA, and I don't remember it, but it had been by grant.
It's from the Department of Education.
Yeah, well, unfortunately, the grant's expired. We're continuing the program. So that now is an increase of $1.8 million of taxpayer dollars that have to be funded to replace that grant program. So that's always something we should be looking at. That's something that we should be paying attention is grants versus, when we get grants in previous years, how are you going to fund that going forward? Sure.
One other thing I wanted to mention, in terms of the kids that go to non-public schools for which we pay their tuition, the state of Maryland picks up a chunk of that cost based on a complicated formula. But my understanding is the money that we get back from that chunk that the state pays does not go back into the special ed budget per se.
Yeah,
It goes back into the general.
That is correct. That's why I didn't want to bring it up. It's a complicated formula, and it, for some reason, doesn't have to go back in. It's just said to this county to make sure that this is being done.
Is there any double counting going on in chapter 5? Because I'm looking at the summary of student enrollment. This is from that book.
Yeah,
And it shows the total for special ed is 1,880.
yeah, that's the issue, is it's no longer counted because if the child is in the homeschools, those are students that aren't in homeschool.
Okay.
That's what that is.
Or they're not in one of the schools.
One of the categories above.
Also, they're not called special ed.
No, what ends up happening is, as we said, they used to present it that way. They no longer, with a homeschool model,
Oh.
the assumption is that since 67% of kids are there, 1,800 are in certain programs. And what ends up happening is that, as I said, I had to go to the state to find out the number. There is no place that talks about it in the budget. There's a state presentation done every October. So that was there, and then you can go to one of the appendices and look at one of the areas of students served, the first line of the summary, and you can add that and figure out that that would be your growth next year. So for 450 students roughly, we have 83 staff. Special education, that's not that high bad a ratio, because it can be, depending on the program and growth, it can be anything from 1 to 4 staff to 1 to 16 staff. So this is probably sitting around you're sitting around the 6 to 8 staff in programs. So I wasn't too upset with that but you had to literally go to other sources to find out, was this legitimate? Nothing in chapter 5 would have told you that. So that's the biggest things that with here is that huge amount of money. You can't tie everything back to how it's being spent. And that's the biggest problem that I see in their budget on this is the transparency.
I just want to make a comment. If you're accurate on one of your lines, that 1.06 million is due to an increase of 23 students in prior placement, that means that's about $50,000.
Yeah, it's 46. It was like $46,000 on average. I know what the Catherine Thomas School would be, so just KTS, just because I have prior experience. That's not that abnormal. That's about 40,000. So, they get discounts. The county gets discounts because they're such a frequent user. Yeah, that's about right. So it's not that. The interesting thing in the past was when we would calculate what they were actually spending for the students in the public schools, it turned out it wasn't that much different than in a lot of programs sending those students to a private placement. That was what was more amazing to me than anything else over the past, if you look at some of the programs. But the reality of trying to tie each program with the students is a very difficult issue with special education. We'd love to be able to do it, but the way the presentation is done, even throughout the 75, 80 pages, you cannot tie everything to it. That's where I would say transparency and accountability are the two areas that I wish we could tie for budget purposes. Not talking about programs, just financially. It's very difficult, and Gordy's got the same issue with the other sides. If we could close that gap and make it easier to understand and know where the transparency is, everybody in this room would be happier. If nothing else, they'd know that it's being spent appropriately. Thank you kindly. Have a great one.
6 is the Office of Shared Accountability. And what this office does, we're responsible for, they function in applied research, which means they conduct research on student outcomes, supposedly. They develop prediction models and modeling tools. They conduct analysis of performance targets, supposedly. And they conduct surveys, although now I think Gallup does that for $900,000. They also are responsible for internal audits and financial program audits, including the Independent Activity Fund, which is the money that is collected for each individual school for student activities. And they also manage the external audit contract. They are also responsible for policy review, revision, and development, working with the Board of Education. And they are also responsible for all the student records, program evaluations, reporting, and testing. So, and their budget is really, I guess, compared, I'm not a finance person, but little amounts of money get me excited. So, in reality, it's probably not much of a big deal. For fiscal year 2015, their budget is $4.4 million, and it's an increase of $135,500 from fiscal year 2014. And of course, most of this is an increase in the personnel compensation, which is going, it's an increase of $127,000 of their $4.2 million personal compensation. Contractually, they spend $184,000 on contracts, and this is increased by $5,000. And travel is increased by $3,000. It's up to $9,944. So for the fiscal, so I just went over the increases and what they're responsible for. But if you look back to fiscal year 2013, we're now, in fiscal year 2015, it's back up to the 2013 levels. In 2013, a big part of that, again, comparatively speaking, it's really not a big part, but contractually, they spent almost $500,000 on outside contracts. So if you look between fiscal year 2013 and 14, the salaries and wages actually increased by $148,000 without any increase in full-time employees, but there's a big drop in contractual, which decreased by almost $300,000. And their performance measures, OSA is really the performance measurer. They're supposed to be monitoring everybody else in terms of performance measures. So this leads to big, major concerns for me. Who watches the watchers? The salaries and wages have increased $275,000 from 2013 to 2015, with only an increase of 0.6 full-time employees. OSA also controls the data. I know some people, Parents Coalition, have tried to get data from this office and have not succeeded. When they were issuing their surveys, I looked at the returns, and there was only like 25% returns on surveys. So of course, although 25% showed everyone was happy, and now with the Gallup control surveys, getting paid $900,000 to show how many are hopeful. In audits, to me, this big issue came up recently with Rock Terrace incident. I don't know how many of you know that. I'm sure Lyda can give a much better explanation. But the really big, important thing to point out here is there are actually ties between MCPS employees and OSA and the bank where the student accounts were set up. There are actually two people, Suzanne DeGrava, who's the MCPS Chief Financial Officer, is on the board of directors of the credit union where the student accounts were set up, and also Roger Pisha, who is on the internal audit unit. He's on the supervisory board of the credit union. Lyda, do you want to give a short recount in case people don't know what Rock Terrace is?
Rock Terrace is a special education only school for kids with moderate disabilities who are going to enter the world of work. All of them have IEPs. The shortest possible version is credit union accounts were set up in these children's names without their parents' knowledge, without their parents' permission, using the kids' social security accounts. The kids were paid for work done either in school or out of school. Money went into the credit union accounts in these children's names and was withdrawn in cash. And nobody seems to be able to tell us where the cash went. We don't know. It involved at least 111 students going back 10 years.
And there is somebody investigating this. The school system said it was, they're not doing anything anymore.
The school system considers themselves done. John McCarthy, the
State's
attorney, has convened a grand jury and subpoenaed all the records of the students who had accounts at the credit union. Other agencies are investigating, but I can't talk about right now because I don't really want me to. But
This is it's not closed, is what.
It's, we're not done.
MCPS says that it's closed,
Totally
but it's not done yet.
It's not a done deal. So, and the way this was found out was because some of these children received notices from Social Security that their public benefits were impacted because they had money in these accounts that their parents never knew existed. And they had their Social Security benefits reduced because of this money.
The accounts have social security numbers attached to them for the children?
Yes.
They did.
So,
But I think
without the
parents
parents' knowledge or permission, so.
That's downright illegal.
So, anyway, the takeaway from Office of Shared Accountability is who washes the washers. Chapter 7 is Office of Community Engagement and Partnerships.
Question before me. And that is, I noticed, I like your who watches the watcher, because obviously nobody is. But it is in Montgomery County, but the auditors are in this little office over here, hidden away. Whereas in Fairfax County, the head auditor for the public schools has his or her evaluation done by the audit committee of the board there. So there's quite a bit of independence there. And today I read in the newspaper, without it ever happening in Montgomery County, that there's a suggestion from one of their legislators that they have an inspector general who is put in charge of the Fairfax County Public Schools, who will report to the Board of Supervisors.
Well, you asked that of Mr. Bowers, he kind of
Said it wasn't
beat
necessary.
the bush.
Yeah, he said would.
Yeah, that ain't gonna
But
happen.
if they can't manage the money at Rock Terrace, which is a school of only 100 kids,
Yeah.
how would we expect them to manage 2 billion?
But we get a mean junkyard dog with an inspector general, you can do it.
Well, that's a whole different ball of wax as to the Montgomery County Inspector General, and I'll leave it at that.
The Office of Community Engagement and Partnerships is pretty self-explanatory. They engage with the community and they partner with any organization that they can. In the fiscal year 2015, they proposed 31.3 FTEs, which is an increase of 5.8 employees. And the total dollars would be about $2.9 million, which is an increase of $539,568 from the previous year, so over $500,000. Personnel, of course, most of that is personnel compensation, and which they noted that actually $63,940 of that is for step increases. And contractually, there's no change in terms of amount. As supplies and materials, there's just $6,000 for SSL supplies. Travel, there's no change. And miscellaneous, which is a nice category, $62,300. I really would want to know what all that miscellaneous stuff is. And that is actually an increase. The only increase noted is $12,000 for the Kennedy Cluster Project Emergency Cash Fund.
And that's just cash payments to families.
Emergency cash for whoever deems it necessary that families need cash.
Joshua Starr said, oh, we'll tell you the details about that later, but
We've never heard the details.
we never
That
heard.
program's been around 5+ years. We don't know what it's doing. We just know it's shooting money.
Well, supposedly another $12,000 comes from the county, from the DHHS. And so now MCPS is throwing in another $12,000. Yeah, as you said, who knows what it's for. So to explain the increases and decreases from 2014 to 2015, as I mentioned, step increases are $63,000 in supplies. The big portion of it is strategic priority enhancements, I love their terminology. 469, well, they quoted $469,178, but in reality, it's $504,178 because they left out an addition, which I'll get to. But $59,437 is going towards the Kennedy Cluster Project. This includes $47,000 for 2.4 teacher level positions. And it's actually not in the Kennedy cluster, it's for as,
Watkins Mill.
yes, Watkins Mill cluster. But I was trying to remember your name. Just slipped me, sorry.
You told me Watkins.
Yes. As you already mentioned before, yes, that it's going to the Watkins Mill cluster. For their after-school programs at 2 middle schools. And the miscellaneous $12,000, they say to help serve families with emergency cash assistance, which are referred by the schools, and it's matching county's Department of Health and Human Services. So this is for the multi-agency team to distribute. So the missing, I'll skip, I'll just do it now. A .5 evaluation specialist for $35,000. This is the part that was missing from the increase. They probably threw it in the last minute. But this evaluation specialist is going to conduct a study of the Kennedy Cluster Project. There has never been an in-depth formal evaluation. And then the 5 FTEs to expand this an OCP are 2 FTE P-level directors. One of them directors is for partnering with more businesses, and the other director is to lead engagement and suggest collaborations. I don't understand support family-facing staff. That was pretty odd terminology. I don't understand that. And then there's 2 FTE parent community coordinators, increasing from 10, so that means we'll have 12 now. One of those is for the new joint engagement plan, a host of new activities supporting STAR BOE outreach. And Parents Coalition actually has a nice blogspot article on this and how it was revealed. This joint engagement plan was discussed at one of those off-site meetings that they had. And the other FTE for the parent community coordinator is for expanding the study circles. And one more admin secretary. And I just included the salary schedule because they're adding 2 P-level directors whose salary ranges from $106,961 to $135,000. And those would be, they already have 2 O-level supervisors there who make anywhere from $100,000 to $129,000. So obviously they need more help. Performance measures, well, they wrote up some interesting ones. Their claimed accomplishments are to, well, they realigned the study circles, student service learning, and linkages to learning to fall under OSAP. They gave away 14,000 backpacks via fundraising and partners. They created student achievement action groups for African American and Latino communities, and they had an historic community conversation on African American student achievement. Their performance measures, I won't bother reading them, but basically what's been pointed out before is just a numbers game. There's no outcome measurements. It's just number of partnerships and how many they should increase them by, number of calls handled, number of parents provided direct one-on-one support, which they consider advocacy, like at IEP meetings and any kind of parent-teacher meetings, which to me sounds more like they probably have a translator there. I don't know how many people accompany people to parent-teacher meetings. Number of study circles. Study circle, their definition addresses racial and ethnic barriers to student achievement and parent involvement by engaging diverse staff, parents, and students in dialogue and problem solving. And they collaborate on actions that impact attitudes, practices, and policies. That's what they say they do. There was no actual performance measure other than increasing the number of study circles. And the number of interagency partnerships, which I guess is different than the number of partnerships that they cited before with linkages to learning, which is actually pretty big numbers, 320 organizations, and supposedly they have 215 organizations that they've paired with just regular community, not necessarily linkages to learning. And linkages to learning, if you don't know, is provides accessible service to at-risk children and families to improve adjustment to and performance in school, home, and community. They provide prevention and early intervention, so a lot of social services, mental health, social service, education support, which includes tutoring, supposedly, mentoring, install literacy. And supposedly they increased the number of families served by languages learning. So the major concerns I have with this are, since this is the Kennedy Cluster Project, major concerns, since Kennedy Cluster Project is about the achievement gap, has it closed significantly? And how does any change in the gap correlate to dollars spent? Of course, we don't know that because there's never been an in-depth study, which they, I guess we're going to pay $35,000 to find that out now. And I just included at the end additional, there are some facts at the Board of Ed on pages 9, 11, and 15. And I have to briefly go over them. Question 1 was, how many parent community coordinator positions are budgeted and what schools do they serve? So that was question 9. And if you go on the facts page, you can see what that is. But that directly talks about parent community coordinators. And then, let's see, question 11 was about adding the 5 positions to this OSEP at a cost of $532,000. So please provide specific details. So it goes into more details than what's actually available in the budget. And the last question is question 15. Says, please explain why a 0.5 evaluation specialist must be added to the Office of Shared Accountability to conduct a study of the Kennedy Cluster Project, as opposed to having this study performed with existing staff. And they go into the whole explanation. Even though they say the multi-agency team began operating in September 2009, Kennedy Cluster actually started in 2007 by Nancy Barlow and Valerie Irvin when they were on the BOE. But what they say is somebody did this work pro bono, and former OSA staffer who's been participating in these teams and giving updates, I guess. So they claim that a quantitative study will be difficult and time-consuming because each individual student's file will have to be reviewed in detail, reviewing academic achievement, attendance, and disciplinary record. A researcher also will have to work with county and state agencies that are partners with the school system, and then looking at what services. So basically, it's excuses why they haven't done it 7 years into the program. But I thought that was interesting. But we're going to pay $35,000 now. So hopefully it'll show some performance outcomes.
First of all, let me congratulate you and thank you for this enormous amount of work. I see that we have a room full of budget geeks in here. Joan had indicated to have nothing else to do than go through their board and documents and get this information. I find this to be really enlightening. I apologize for coming a little late, but Joy and Montgomery from my office were here a little earlier. And to the degree that you have additional points that you want to pass on to me, I certainly appreciate hearing from you. It is my habit, as you know, to try to get around the county as much as I possibly can, despite the fact that I've been in some form of public service for a fairly large period of time in my life here in the county. There are still things that I learn each and every day from citizens because we have one of the more active, well-informed group of citizens anywhere in the country. But it should not, I was sitting there thinking that it should not have to result in your spending as much time to get basic information that should readily be available to you. And that's a little bit of a challenge for us because, as you know, the school system is not directly in our total responsibility. And oftentimes we have some challenges as well getting information. But to the degree that we can assist you with some of the information that you need in order to provide the kind of insight that is helpful, please contact our office. And certainly Joy will be a contact person so that we can make that process a little bit more easy. It is, I think, something that you've started that I think is beneficial. I can see where with additional information, additional time, it can be even more informative for our community. But
One of the things that we keep in mind that as I look around the room, as though you're talking to the choir, people who are somewhat aware of the challenges of people. And the real challenge is to expand these type of forums so that others will have an opportunity to listen to hear what you have to say. But more important is to get the information so that you're not guessing about certain things and not having the information that should be readily available. But again, I want to thank you for spending this enormous amount of time to do what you've done. I think it's quite helpful. Yeah.
I wonder if I could ask you a question. We've been comparing to Fairfax County, but can we also compare Montgomery County Public Schools to the county government? I know you've done some reorganization in the county government, and could you say something about, is it standard practice in the county government to have supervisors supervise half a secretary? Has there been efforts made in the county government to streamline the overhead and the organization? Are there lessons learned from one side of the Rockville Pike to the other side?
Well, certainly. As you know, our budgets have been much more carefully scrutinized, and we've had to be far more accountable. We have eliminated, for example, 10% of the entire county workforce. 10%. That's a huge, huge number. And there are a number of very painful things that we did in county government that were not shared by some of the outside agencies. Some of the things that they've done. But when you go back and look at the kinds of things that the county government did in Montgomery County, no other county, no other city, no other government in the region did as much as we did with our employees for as long as we did. Repeat that. No one did as much and for as long. Some did some of the things that we did, but no one did all of the things that we did for as long as we did. And as a result of that, we see ongoing savings now that are really quite beneficial for us. My projection is that by the time we finish the recommendation of the budget in a couple of weeks, the county will have the highest financial reserve in the history of the county. Let me repeat that. We will have the highest financial reserve of about 8.1 to 8.3% in the history of the county. The objective is to take that up to almost 10%. That's a reflection of the tough decisions that we've had to make. And I cannot see that the school system get anywhere near those kinds of things. Also keep in mind that we have the sort of a built-in floor, which is the maintenance of effort. So that with that floor, it is not likely that you're going to get a huge amount of savings. But there are things that we have been looking at that I think that through MACO, the Maryland Association of Counties, and others, to try to get the school system to be much more accountable and cooperative with the county governments. And there are a number of things which we have some serious problems about in terms of efficiency. Let me give you an example. For years, if you take a county vehicle, whether it's a police vehicle, an emergency vehicle of some sort, trucks that we have certain fueling stations for which you go and get fuel. You get it at a reduced cost because of the good volume. So, we said a few years ago, why not all the vehicles in the county? Not just county vehicles, but all of them on the one system. All vehicles are fueled the same type of system, and thereby further reducing fuel. You thought it was World War III to get that done. It was a huge, huge fight to get that done. There are a number of things that you can look at in terms of just efficiency that we think can be helped. But the real problem is we have a maintenance of effort. And I have no problem with having a maintenance of effort. My problem is that it is not as flexible that it needs to be. When you have that, you're going to build in a certain cost no matter how you look at some of these other things. And therefore, when you're looking at adjustments and changes, you're looking at the margins. you look at the margins here and there, because you built in per student a certain floor that's virtually impossible to change. And the state 2 years ago made that law even more inflexible in terms of the ability to get around. So thanks for your question.
Chapter 8 synopsis. This is the Chief Operating Officer's budget. It's a nice segue from what Ike was just talking to. This is the overhead budget. So, for example, we have a huge bus fleet in the school system, over 1,200 buses. And the question has come up time and again, why is maintenance on those buses done separately from maintenance to county vehicles? That's a darn good question. The mechanics that work on these buses make an average of $64,000 a year in MCPS. I have no idea what the county mechanics make. I would hope it's comparable, but I don't know. But certainly, the county with 1,200 buses for the school system and thousands of other vehicles for other county activities could realize significant economies of scale through shared services. So I thought that was a nice setup. The Chief Operating Officer's budget, this is Larry Bowers and his organization, is $852 million. Now, $584 million of that, or almost 3/4 of it, is for the benefits that we pay employees. So they had to have a home for health and retirement and all the rest of that happy stuff, and that lives here.
Workers' comp is in there too.
Yeah, but I do want to talk about that just briefly. $584 million for benefit programs. You would expect, well, that's a big chunk of the budget. That's 25% of the budget, right? You would expect in a document as thick as that phone book that Joan held up, that there'd be, I don't know, 50 pages of schedules explaining what, well, there isn't. There's about a half a page that explains $584 million. I want to come back, I'll start from the top. The budget's nearly half of MCPS's overhead. It lives in the Chief Operating Officer's budget. These are costs that don't directly link to academic instruction. Observation 2, based on the full-time equivalents, the overhead includes the 4,351 employees shown in this organization, plus 2,341 shown in the K-12 budget. That's principals and other administrators and media specialists and counselors and all the rest of that. And there's another 775 overhead employees in Table 5. That brings you to a total of overhead employees of 7,467 out of the 21,000 or so employees. But if you add non-labor costs to that, and there are considerable material non-labor costs for contracts and supplies, and then you add the county's contribution to the school system, which includes all the nurses, all the security, those are the policemen, and they have a fancy name, but these are the cops.
School resource officers.
Say that again?
School resource.
School resource officers. We're paying for that out of the county budget, not the school system.
And the debt service.
And crossing guard service.
Thank you. And technology contributed by the county. Suddenly overhead rises to 46%. There is not an organization in the world outside of government that can tolerate a 46% level of overhead. I'm going to pay Ike a compliment. I haven't looked at the numbers, but I'll bet you the county's budget for overhead is not 46%. When you do budgeting the way we do it in MCPS, incrementally, where you just look at the change from last year, as Ike said, you're budgeting on the margin. You never look at the base. You never look at that $2 billion. There be dragons in the base, and they are eating the maintenance of effort budget alive. Literally, the school system has found that the maintenance of effort is no longer the savior they thought it would be, but a cap on spending. It's a cap on spending. And they don't know how to take apart the overhead that is eating the budget alive, 46%. so that they can spend more on teachers to lower the achievement gap. So that's why this is a strategic question. How much overhead? I'm going to keep moving forward here. Observation 3. There is no productivity or benchmark data to justify any of the costs in this budget. Why do we need 1,259 school buses? Why not 1,100?
Because we'd like to provide one student per school bus.
Well, a big part of it is school buses, and why all big buses instead of vans?
Because
The
they
big
block the streets
question
better.
is, why do we have a school bus fleet at all? You look at most European countries, they have no school bus fleets. The children who have to get transit, get public transit, they ride with the grown-ups look after the kids.
To the best of my knowledge, there's never been a study on outsourcing school buses.
No, they have done it.
Is that right?
Yeah, they did. And it's interesting because Howard County's is outsourced.
Howard County's outsourced the public bus system,
Right.
but I don't know about the school system.
No, absolutely.
Okay.
It's
I
all
used to
part
know
of the
somebody
same
that
system.
owned 25 buses to do it, but
So that's a big question, isn't it? You would think it'd be answered in a budget that delivers 46% overhead. It is not.
Yeah.
Fringe benefits are in this budget, but as I said, no justification. And a big issue, I'm going to come to this in a second, so let me hold on to that for a second. Okay, by the numbers, if you look at FTEs, you see there's a variety. There's 55 people in the back office doing bean counting and stuff that I do. There's 360 maintenance folks, and they're the folks that keep things working in the schools, not always easy. There's 1,387 folks in plant operations, and they are more generalized. These are folks that have mops and brooms. There's 1,733 people in transportation, not all of whom drive a bus, because we know there's only 1,259 buses, and a significant percentage of them are probably in the maintenance bay on any given day. Food handlers, 585, and then a bunch of other people that are involved in management and construction. Off the budget, there's always a way to do stuff off the budget to escape budget scrutiny. We have a capital budget. There's 40 people in there worrying about whether or not we have enough schools for enrollment increases. Important job. Significantly, this year's budget reduces that count by 28. In fact, Larry would brag that he's had a net decrease of 9 full-time equivalents from last year in his proposed 2015 budget. 1,754 of those are school-based. Most of those are school plan operations, mops and brooms, or foodies. I can associate, in terms of direct overhead, those that are school-based, 1,754, the rest are indirect overhead. In terms of the numbers, the budget, this is $852 million, which is an increase of $27 million, not a significant increase. Again, no big increases for salaries and wages at this point, subject to negotiation. The count breaks down in terms of professional staff, small number of people, well paid, and they I'm sure earn it. This is a big budget to manage. Most of the folks are in what are called support services, 4,203. That's where the transportation workers, food workers, plant operations, and maintenance folks live. And you can see the numbers. The highly compensated maintenance folks, $64,170 a year. Should receive comparable compensation to folks that do the same job for the county's fleet of vehicles, but I don't know the answer. Contracts are pretty much, spending is about the same as last year, supplies the same. Benefits have increased because of higher healthcare costs. And so that raises some questions. I guess my first issue, though, would be issue 1. How do these costs compare to other school systems? The other school systems with 150,000 kids have 1,259 buses. They have more or less, I don't. And this is number 2. This is one that I know Ike loves. If MCPS's health costs were made the same as those of other county employees, how would the savings be spent, and would there be savings? Now, I think this is my big softball question over here. How much have we estimated the savings might be?
Prior years, it was 35 million.
35 million?
That was in prior years before, and that's before the county's gotten much more efficient in their usage, and the school employees' benefits have remained pretty much stable.
There's a lot of money. Joan, I think we've estimated that
Yeah, we
the federal employees have an inferior health program to that of the school
Yeah.
system.
The
But-
school
and the
system's
school-
better than the feds.
And under the American Care Act, they will also, that plan will be considered a Cadillac plan. So there will be tax implications to the, to long-term, unless they get an exception for those employees. Because it is definitely over that 80%. It's sitting right around 90% to 93%, depends on the plan you're in. So it's in an area where there will be tax implications
Thank you.
going forward starting 2015.
So it's a significant issue, but it's not addressed in the budget.
Right.
Number 3, the state in its last audit, which was 2009, said that MCPS's facility and transportation costs were way out of line with other school systems in the state and other school systems in the country. High cost, high labor costs. This budget doesn't talk about that. It maintains the status quo. I'd sure like to know, I'd like to see accountability on that issue. State audit follow-up, though, has not been widely published. Fourth and last, and this goes to the point that you made earlier, is there ever going to be an analysis that shows what shared services with the county, say back office activities with bus mechanics, or how outsourcing food, bus operators, plant operations, maintenance could reduce costs? I think I asked Larry Bowers this question, he said no. And I can tell you there's no junkyard dog in Montgomery County's public school system, and as you know too well, the Inspector General for the county is literally not allowed to address MCPS issues unless invited. The invitation's haven't. So accountability is a big problem, and the only time we have accountability is when the state, which has oversight of our school system, steps in. And in a report in 2009, they said we had cost issues, to the best of my knowledge, ever something.
Cody?
Yes, ma'am.
The one suggestion I had for the school system on this was a huge amount of $500 million for benefits.
Yeah.
I wish they would show a portion of that that applies to each of the chapters. They don't have to double count it.
Right.
Because it's not a fully loaded cost. So when you look at the teacher's cost there, it doesn't include benefits.
Right.
So I wish they could do that.
I wish.
Because otherwise it's a line item for
It's a lot of
$1 billion.
money.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Thank you.
Can I ask a question?
Yeah.
On this benefits?
Yes.
Where I worked on budgets in many, many years. And this benefit amount, is any of that kept in an account, or is it actually money spent? Do you know?
Yes, there are funds and they're well accounted for, and we self-insure.
Some of this, we are self-insured, and that's why, once in a while you'll see, if their experience rating is that they've been putting monies in, all of a sudden you'll see a change, whether it be positive or negative, based on experience. And you usually will see that all of a sudden there will be in the April budget, the April P&L presented to the Board of Ed, you'll see that's when they finally come clean with what's going on for the year. You'll see in April or May, all of a sudden you'll see a bump up or bump down. It's always the month after the school's budget is made official, because there can be, a couple of years it was as much as $12 million that all of a sudden became found money. So they may be specifically over
budgeting.
correct. Yeah, in putting it in, and all of a sudden miraculously it appears as a surplus at the end of the year.
You think that's where the surplus is?
Well, the surpluses in the past year, if you were looking where that surplus came from, it came from primarily lapses where they changed, they had more turnover than they wanted, so they got rid of, so people retired, higher salaries replaced it with lower salaries. And the second one that was amazingly high has been in the past was the special education budget was a significant contributor to that amount, because it appears that they were using paraeducators and other lower cost positions where the budget and services designated said use a higher cost position. So that was definitely where the reserves have come in. Then we'll talk about that one because that means the services are questionably being performed.
Thank you. I'm going to go through chapters 9 and 10 really quickly. Chapter 9 is the Office of the Chief Technology Officer, and it's quite large. Overall, there are 156 positions here with a budget of $26,488,817 proposed for FY15, and it's fairly consistent. The 2014 was 26,048,880, so they're adding 400,000, so almost $500,000 there. And the number of positions actually is proposed to go down by 1. And this is a large office. They do all the technical support for the, they do training, technology, installation of software. They run the telephone systems and provide all the technology support for the schools, as well as do all the training for teachers. I just had a few highlights here. When we talk about the performance measures, again, it's just very, very odd. Performance measure, here's one for the Department of Business Information Services. The percentage of software implemented without major defects. FY 2014 estimate 100%. I mean, FY 2013 actual 100%. So Kathy Sebelius should look no further than our school system. And this amount, these performance measures are, if you go through each one of these subgroups, are always at minimum 86, 87%. And anybody who works in a large organization and gets new software put onto their computer knows that it's really rare to find performance measures like this where software implementation, there were 0 major. Then the Office of Human Resources, they do the hiring, the training, mentoring of underperforming teachers and so forth. And just quickly, they have a staff of 117 people, and their budget that they're proposing is an additional about 400,000. So it's $17,982,114. And I'll pass it on to Chris, who's going to read Chapter 11.
The Office of the CTO, years ago, was one of the areas that we recommended when I was on the Blue Ribbon panel, that over 50% of the staff would be eliminated. What it turned out to be is what it does and how they're doing it is not as efficient as the industry model.
What?
And they could have been literally outsourced most of that scenario and would save money and efficiency.
Right.
They've only gotten bigger, and that was one of the areas that was identified. It was funny because it was identified by the principals union as being an area that should have been outsourced years ago.
I'm a recent graduate of Montgomery County Public Schools. I went to Winston Churchill High School. So I did Chapter 11, Board of Education and the Office of the Superintendent of Schools. So the sub-departments were Board of Education Superintendent's Office, Department of Public Information and Web Services, and MCPS Television, which actually had a long So for the Board of Education, for the total budget for this section, actually, we can see a $184,000 increase. That's so from 2013 to 2014, there's 16.5% increase, and proposed budget for 2015 calls for another 3.5%. So for as a subsection of this, the Board of Education, from 2013 to 2014, increased by 4.1%, and now for the 2015 budget, it calls for another 1.8%.
How do they have,
For the Office of the Superintendent, increased 43% from 2013 to 2014, and another 2% for the coming year. The Department of Public Information and Web Services increased 23.5% from 2013 to 2014, and another 1.7% for 2015. And then the Instructional Television Special Revenue Fund increased 7% from 2013 to 2014, as opposed to increase another 8% in 2015. So now we get onto the issues in the budget and ways, things that we could cut out. All right, so for the Board of Education, it's from the cover that they wrote, says it promotes and regulates educational programs and meets twice a month. They run on a $1.1 million budget, which to me seems a little excessive. It consists of chief of staff, 2 staff assistants, 2 admin service managers, and 3 administrative secretaries. It seems like a lot of secretaries. And from what I read, it didn't really seem like they were telling you what they did. They just said we make policies that help. It didn't describe any performance measures. They said combating alcohol and drug use is one of their policies. They didn't say anything about it or what it did. And then they just had one titled ethics.
hundreds of thousands.
Apparently, they just teach people ethics. I don't know. It didn't tell you anything. Yeah.
Well, that's interesting because they have an ethics board that reviews these financial disclosures, and that's an unpaid ethics board. So I'm not sure who does.
This was one policy that they passed. I'm not exactly sure what it is. They didn't really.
Right, but it's kind of interesting because they do have a committee, or an ethics committee or something, 3 unpaid folks who come in once a year and make sure nobody has a conflict of interest.
I think actually this one was mentioned like ethics to teach students in school. But
Okay.
Yeah.
As opposed to teaching the staff.
Yeah. Debatable whether or not you can teach someone ethics, but so now we move on to the Office of the Superintendent, and they're these are accomplishments. 59.4% of students pass Algebra 1 with a C or higher by the end of 8th grade. Average score on the SAT 1648. 73% of students getting a 3 or higher on AP exam. And these statistics aren't that good. At least they don't seem very good to me. From the school I came from, these would be terrible.
He's in the green zone.
Which school is that?
Winston Churchill High School.
Yeah.
So what disturbed me was that they were trying to paint these in a positive light. I couldn't see it as positive. Not good. In Fairfax County, this similar department, their office of superintendent employs 3 people with a budget of $0.4 million. Actually, from in this office, 3 new positions were added in 2013. Namely the general counsel, paralegal, and legal secretaries. But and so that's why, you know, there's a 43% increase in the budget for this department. However, in Fairfax County, they were actually able to eliminate 3 positions for this coming year, for the 2015 budget proposal. And I mean, the Fairfax County budget for this is less than half of what, you know, we plan on spending. So now, under the Department of Public Information and Web Services, the only necessary service that this department does is, you know, keep up the school website, which is useful and, you know, it provides you everything you need to know. But they also spend a good deal of money trying to stay up to date with things like Twitter and YouTube. Children, you know, school kids do not go on YouTube to watch videos about their school. They don't do that. I know I never did. They don't. And they wouldn't subscribe to a Twitter account that has anything to do with school, and they don't.
You missed the snow issue with Dr. You're out of the school, but apparently Dr. Starr got some untoward emails about canceling school on Twitter a couple weeks ago, and sent out a global policy about parents should, about using technology in Twitter. It was in the newspaper. So apparently a lot of kids do Twitter, and Twitter backs to Dr. Starr.
It's like 10 or 20, it's not a lot.
Well, no.
I wouldn't count on many people subscribing to that. But and the other thing is that this department spends a lot of money trying to be multilingual. But I mean, most people speak English here pretty well. I mean, you know, it's not that necessary. And I was surprised because one of the languages I hadn't even heard of. Has anyone here heard of Amharic?
Yeah.
Ethiopian. I don't see how.
How much of the budget is for language?
It didn't say. They
Largest concentration of Ethiopians in the country.
Really?
Yes.
Whereas in Fairfax County, their similar department is the Communications Community Outreach Program, which spends about $0.2 million annually, which is modest compared to this $1.75 million. Then we move on to the last one, the Instructional Television Special Revenue Fund. So, for show of hands, how many people watch the MCPS TV channel regularly?
Ask how many people have never seen it. Or ever going to see it.
I mean, when I was in high school, I was on my high school's It's Academic team. And we did this show called Quizmaster that was shown there. Even though I was on TV several times, I never watched it. I never would. It's so boring, and for, you know, to see, you know, how interesting it is, you can check out their program guide, and I don't know what to say. You know, people would much rather watch, you know, something else. I mean, any information that they show, you could easily find on the website. Probably take you less time, and probably a little less boring too. So I don't think that I don't even think that the entire, you know, TV channel is worth it. And I can tell you, school kids don't watch this. And like I said, I never watch it. So, yep, it's a resolution.
Thank you.
So the last section are the appendices, and Jamie Sartucci is going to present that. I just want to make a pitch before you present that. This weekend, the same group, the Civic Fed, Taxpayers League, and Parents Coalition, along with sponsorship from the Sunlight Foundation, are putting on a civic hacking event, the Great Montgomery Hackathon. So we'd invite everybody, and you can tell your friends too. We have some projects that we're going to be working on, and it's going to be at the Bethesda Chevy Chase Regional Services Center on Saturday and Sunday. It'll start each day at 9:30. So just wanted to have a pitch there.
That would be really, really fast, because I'm a fast talker. First of all, I just want to make the point why we're here, and the reason we're here is because the MCPS budget is not discussed by our elected Board of Education. Years ago, they took that process and moved it behind closed doors. It's not transparent. There's no information. If you go to the MCPS website, you're not going to be able to figure this out. But through Public Information Act requests and other information, we've been able to put together what goes on. In fact, on the Parents Coalition blog, we did obtain agendas from some of these behind-the-scenes meetings that have taken place. We only got one pack. We asked for agendas and minutes. We were told there are no minutes. So we're to believe that the budget is put together and no one takes notes. Okay, fine. We know on that committee is representative of the 3 unions, Larry Bauer's staff. After we started complaining about this committee, they put a couple PTA people on there, but we're not sure who from the PTA goes and what they do, because everyone that is in this room signs a super secret, I will not tell anybody. I think they sign it in blood. Pardon me?
That's the mafia political marathon.
So we don't get any reports back from this committee, and as I said, when I asked for the public information agendas and minutes, there were no minutes. So super secret. So that's why we're here. We're here to lend some public discussion to this document that doesn't get discussed anymore. It used to be big budget meetings at the Board of Education would go till 2 in the morning, discussing the budget chapter by chapter, page by page. They don't do that anymore. It's all behind the scenes.
Okay, let's ask you a quick question. I'm
Sure.
sorry. I'm actually running for Board of Education, so I'm
Oh, okay.
Is this ethical? Is it legal to have the members of the unions sitting at the table making the budget decisions that affect their?
Well, where I think you've got a violation is an Open Meetings Act, because the Board of Education, by law, is to set the budget. Okay, the state law is pretty light on their job, but that is one of their jobs, and they aren't doing their job. And I believe where you're going to get into trouble is with the Open Meetings Act. In recent years, we've heard rumor that they've started having some board members attend the budget meeting, in which case, that's where we're going to get into an Open Meeting Act violation. If they start
meeting off-site with Board of Ed members
and the board taking their, what they do as their budget. There's, that's.
I'm sorry, the oversight committee, where is?
What oversight committee?
They don't
Sharon is also considering running for Board of Ed. Oh, right. So that's why we have a violation, but so what
Well, the
happens?
school board is really cut out of the budget process too. They have a Q&A session.
That's what I'm saying, exactly. It's done, the secret committee writes the budget. The budget comes to the Board of Ed, the Board of Ed goes, okay. Now, we had one board member, Laura Berthume, 2 years in a row, she objected to the budget based on the fact she hadn't written it. And she publicly spoke out against this behind closed door process. So, we know this happens anyway. So we have agendas we don't have yet.
Who develops the budget again? Who was
Okay,
on
it's a
that group?
committee
It's
of
three?
Larry Bauer's staff, representatives
The guy with all the
of,
staff, okay.
well, top people,
Right.
secret people, representatives of the 3 employee unions. And after we started complaining about this and making it public, they added in 1 or 2 MCCPTA people, don't know who, don't know anything about it.
And they don't want to be known, they don't come out.
They signed a secret that they won't reveal.
It's usually.
They've signed a document that says they will not reveal what goes on in these meetings.
And they would.
Or allow their identities to be publicized?
I don't know. I can't.
And there's supposed to be 2 representatives from other organizations.
Not that I'm aware of.
Yeah.
Because I've seen pictures. They accidentally make you take
Yeah.
pictures of the room.
There were supposed to be 2 representatives from other organizations
Not that I've ever seen.
representing, so that they would have minority representation?
Not that I've seen, no, because they actually Star did a video. A guy made a video about a day in the life of Star, and one of the places he went that day was to this committee meeting, and it shows everybody sitting there, and I can pretty much identify everybody.
Okay.
So I haven't seen that.
Or they just weren't there that day?
Well, and that's the other thing, is even if you have, for example, these two PTA people that are supposed to be representing the public, if they're not there for all these meetings, then of course you have no representation, and you have no way of knowing that.
Joan, didn't somebody come to one of the people admit that she was there, that we went to one of the MCTL meetings and said, well, I'm on that committee, but I can't tell you anything about it?
She was the head of the PTA.
Oh, that's it.
Yeah, so she was actually on it.
She's on it.
Sure.
But she would not tell you.
She can't tell you what happened.
No.
She
So
can't.
who's she representing?
Right, exactly.
Everybody.
And what is her position on anything too? We don't elect PTA people for positions. They're volunteers. They get these jobs. We don't know if they're political persuasion, we know nothing.
So that was my question. What is the board's control over that policy?
If they don't like you, they don't invite you back.
The board has nothing, no control whatsoever. So the budget comes to the board like this, and they have 2 evenings where they sit and ask questions. And
So
that's
they
it.
can't change, can the board make changes to
Could
that
they?
budget?
Yes, they could by law, but we have elected people that do not believe they have the power to do that, and so they do not.
They're also part-timers.
in a charter?
I think that, actually, that's an important point, because we just went through the budget for the Board of Education itself, and it said only $1 million or $1.1 million. Quite frankly, if we gave them more money where they had staff, they could return our emails, return our phone
No,
calls,
I'm
and
sorry,
make them
no,
more
I'm
productive.
sorry, I have to disagree. They've actually had, under Jerry Weiss, they actually had a policy of they were not allowed to. So it didn't matter, you could give them
Not allowed
25
to
staff,
what?
return emails.
Yeah, they were told they weren't supposed to.
So it doesn't matter, you could give them 100 staff. If their policy is to not communicate with the public, it's not gonna happen.
Was
that in the
Well, they're really good at that.
against the charter?
Why do we have them? Why do we have Board of Education? New York City got rid of the Board of Education because they realized how incompetent they were.
Well, that would just take it behind closed doors totally.
No,
So-
it made it in New York City, they made it a mayoral agency. and
Yeah, well, that takes it,
If
that's
we
a
did
whole
the
other.
same thing, Ivy Leggett would be responsible, and I think we'd get a lot more.
Well,
more
that's
administrative-
debatable. That's debatable. But, all right, let me go back for a second. Let me go back for a second. Who's sitting on the board now? These people were born and bred by the Jerry Weiss years. And the Jerry Weiss years were all about do not return phone calls, do not talk to the public, do not meet with the public, do not interact. So even though we have a new superintendent, there hasn't been a change in the mindset of these people that we elected. They were elected to fill this spot, to sit there, to warm their chair, and to raise their hand in support of the budget.
And I was told by one of the board members that we speak with one voice.
Correct.
Not allowed to speak, so- And I'm like, hello, you were elected by us. Hello.
I would just add, I was told, this was a couple years ago when Weiss was the superintendent, that MCPS staff had been instructed not to speak to the board and
That's
not
right.
to answer board questions.
And remember, we met with Judy Daca, and she said she's not supposed to bother staff.
Yeah.
So she's not supposed to ask, she's a board member, she's not supposed to ask questions. Staff isn't supposed to respond to her, they're not supposed to talk to the public. So this has all been set up through Weiss.
Yeah. Over the last year, I was trying to assess whether I was going to run for school board and chose not to. When I talked to chose not to because basically I didn't want to be elected a position that I couldn't. The interesting thing about it was, for example, if you or I wanted to talk to the head of special education, we could make a phone call.
Right.
The board members are not allowed. They're set up like in response, like a board of directors of a corporation. That's how that's how it's being done. It's like they're a corporation
Right.
board of directors. So if you're a staff person, you have to go to the CEO, which is, for all intents and purposes, Jerry Weiss or Larry Bowers. You have to make a request, and it has to be specific to the next meeting's agenda.
Right.
So that basically the board members are being, they're not even, but they've chosen to allow that.
That's right,
It is
that's right.
not that
There
they
are
could
certain people
not.
been picked for that characteristic. Yeah.
I'm also discouraged from running because I was told I would be very frustrated because as an activist, and it would be very frustrating.
Well, that, I mean, certainly Laura Perfume ran into that. She was frustrated, and so she quit, you know, and she,
And that's what Rebecca Smondrowski and I had those conversations. And she goes, I think you'd be better as an advocate than sitting on the board. She goes, I was stunned at how little effectiveness an individual board member at this point can do.
No, it's not always been that way, and not every board member has chosen to do that, you know. Blair Ewing would say, we are not going to, I refuse to discuss this topic because it hasn't been aired and we don't have any community input. And he would do that month after month after month until the superintendent finally caught on.
right, so I mean, this is a change, and also, but this is also a national trend that has been proposed by, for example, the Broad Foundation, where they've actually gone in and spent millions of dollars on candidates, I believe it was in San Francisco, to put out candidates that would be drones. I'm not sure what you want to call it, but yeah, mushrooms is another word. So this is actually a national trend in the private interest trying to take over school systems where they neutralize the board, and then the superintendent becomes the CEO and is all powerful. And then that superintendent can make decisions behind closed doors without the public process. So if you look up the Broad Foundation, you'll find a lot about that.
Or Panasonic.
So what does the charter of the board say?
It's pretty short. Well, it's pretty short. It says, you know, I don't have it memorized, so I don't want to. But what I've looked at in the past, it's very brief.
But the responsibilities are supposed to include, because I've read them all, communicating with the public, getting feedback from the public, informing the agenda and the policy and the budget with the public's input, so.
Yeah, I wonder what this policy is that they cannot.
Behind closed doors.
What are the board?
I mean, I have been at the board office. This was years ago, but I have been at the board office when a board member, who's not on the board anymore, had spoken out in public. After the meeting, he was called back in to a room, the door was shut, and another board member screamed at him as loud as possible. To tell it, because he spoke out. So he had been publicly expressing himself in public. After the meeting, I happened to be in the board office when he was pulled in by another board member, went into a room, door shut, and screamed at.
So didn't he then walk out and make another public thing? I mean, I was coaching a kid in basketball, and he was playing such tough defense that the other kids started complaining and crying. He came and said, "What do I do?" I go, "Keep doing whatever you're doing."
Well, we haven't exactly had that, but so I would just say, so that's why we're here, that's why we're discussing this, that's why we're trying to add some, we do videotape, a lot of people will watch the videotape afterwards, which is, so that's great, it's a great way to get out.
And you want to put in Parents Coalition?
What's that?
The website with Parents Coalition.
Oh, don't ask me, I don't have it memorized. But anyway, we have the blog, Parents Coalition blog, where we'll put the video. But so really what we're trying to do is ask a lot of questions, get people to think, and hopefully stimulate discussion of what isn't being discussed in the budget. And certainly in the appendix, we have some very interesting things. You think the word appendix is going to mean, you know, leftover stuff that's not really important. And in fact, the appendix contains some really important information. Just really quickly, I'll go over it. It has the state budget categories, which is how the budget is organized according to the state. So you have these, there's the description on the first 2 pages and then a listing of each category. What I love is when you get to, for example, every category has a line for contractual services. So here in category 1, administration, there's $7 million in contractual services. What's that for?
Who knows?
There's 900,000 in mid-level for contractual services. Again, you don't know what that's for. My favorite, all-time favorite, is category 4, textbooks. We have $28 million for textbooks, but I can tell you that every year we watch, particularly years ago, it used to be rather egregious, money from the textbook fund gets moved. They can move between categories. That happens at the county council. These things get moved. There's usually no discussion, but we would year after year see money in the textbook category move to other categories without explanation. At the same time, when parents were being told to buy textbooks for their children because there wasn't enough textbook money. So there's no indication of how textbooks are allocated one thing we did learn years ago was some of the textbook money is actually professional textbooks. It's going to the teachers and administrators for their personal libraries. It's not necessarily classroom textbooks. Under category 5, there's another 4.9 million in contractual services. I don't know. I'm just going to go really, really quick. Operations, there's another 2 million. Maintenance of plant, another 2 million in contractual. And then we have a category for fixed charges, which you talked about quite a bit. So there's more on detail on that. Category 51, and I don't know how the numbering works, but is a real estate fund, and category 81 is entrepreneurial activities. These categories are really interesting because somewhere in there is artificial turf money, cell tower revenue, royalties from the wireless generation deal, and the Pearson education deal. Interestingly enough, the other day when the Board of Ed, second day, they discussed this budget, and they did ask questions. One of the questions was, how much money have we made in royalties on the Pearson education deal? Mary Bauer said he'll get back to me. So,
And he never does.
So it's not in the budget. There's no line item for these entrepreneurial activities that supposedly we're supposed to be funding things, you know. And also, we don't really know why the real estate fund gets the revenue from some of these things. That I'm not really clear on, but apparently they do. So for example, cell towers. Cell towers bring in some money. The money ends up, some of it going into the real estate fund. So it's not going to classrooms, it's not going to textbooks. We're not sure where it's going. The other document that's always fascinating and really good to remember is the staffing guidelines right here for general ed and special ed. And these are the super cool documents that parents are always wondering, how many teachers do we get per, how many students? What's the guidelines? And this is where it's listed. This is one of those documents. Why doesn't the Board of Ed discuss this? This information in here is tremendously important to parents. And in fact, if you look between, I pulled out an old, this is a 2006 operating budget, and then coming forward to FY 2015, we see that the guidelines have gone up. There's now, let's see, it used to be 26 to 1 in lower grades, and now it's 27. And in the grades 1 and 2, where they had the reduced class size, it's gone from 17 to 18. And then other fascinating things, like there is no school business administrator for elementary and middle school, LIDA, so Rockville didn't get one. Just for high schools, get a school business administrator. So this is a great reference, and it's for special ed and regular ed, and that is buried in the appendix, and that has a lot of really good information.
Is that the personnel complement that we
No. On the back of the operating budget.
Right, but the personnel complement used to also be.
That's a different, yeah. I'm just
Another
doing the
book that
appendix.
Right.
The other thing that's in the back here in the appendix, which again is fascinating, it's been sort of mentioned, is the non-operating budget positions. That's right, there are positions, people work and are apparently paid through the capital budget, which is interesting. Bob Astro gave me quite a lecture on that earlier this evening. So these are people being paid, what, through bonds? I mean, how are we paying these people? And that number has gone up. In 2007, it was 112 people were in this category of non-operating budget positions. Now we have 139. Interesting about these 139 positions, there's no dollars. I have no idea what this represents.
Do they fall under James Song's authority?
No. There's, this is Chief Operating Officer, Controller, Real Estate, Construction, Facilities Management, Long-Range Planning, Maintenance, Public Information, Chief Technology Officer, Infrastructure and Operations, Information Application, and Technology Support. No, got a lot of stuff in here, and there's no money, so I can't tell you how much this represents. That's one of my favorites about that. Let's see what else we have. The staffing guidelines I told you about. Oh, and I just want to say one thing about the special education staffing plan, which was really interesting. By state regulations, this staffing plan requires public input. So there's a committee that is listed in the back, and the committee needs to set up the staffing plan. There are 6 people on the committee that are not MCPS, So they're outnumbered when they walk in the door. And the other thing is, if you read this document, again, this is the kind of thing you'd probably not read unless you were forced to, you find out that the nuts and bolts of the staffing that is being used in the schools, the hours-based staffing, was set up not by the committee that included the public, but by a committee of elementary principals who had a work group. So little details like that are buried in there that are fascinating. I told you about that. Oh, I want to talk about the Washington area boards that you talked about. That's a great document. We always put that out on the Parents Coalition blog. But one year, Jerry Weiss refused to play. And so Montgomery County is not included in 1 year of that. So it's not a mandatory, it's a voluntary, and 1 year he said no. So we have 1 year where you cannot compare the counties. And then innovation schools, I don't remember who talked about innovation schools. At the last board meeting where they're discussing the budget, it was announced that innovation schools, the name innovation school is too complicated to explain and is being eliminated. There's no replacement name, so I think this is like Prince and Prince. So they decided it was too complicated. It's simple, yes. So it doesn't have a name anymore. It's just going to be a thing they do. And then that we can't track. But exactly. And then I think it was who mentioned that the slush fund. We did even the Board of Education noticed that there was $12,000 in the budget for the Kennedy Cluster project. There was actually laughter. Nobody could actually say what it was for. But actually, a couple board members did go out on a limb and say they thought this was a dangerous precedent to be putting money in the budget for unknown social services. They said it wasn't the board's job to be spending money in this way, and so they questioned it. So,
But they kept it.
of course. But they questioned it. You know, we gotta clap for that, you know. So anyways, but that's just, there's obviously boring stuff in the appendix, but there's obvious other stuff that's super, super important to your everyday kid classroom, you know, what's going on in the classroom. So, thank you.
Thinking about this evening's festivities and whatnot, one of the questions occurred to me is everybody talks about the maintenance of effort. You never see what those figures are. You might see an aggregate amount, but then it's always amended quickly, but it's per student that counts. So I figured, well, you should probably, because everybody's always talking about this, that the Maryland Department of Education would have a charter table listing what are the maintenance of effort amounts for each of the counties that we're being held to. So I did a search against that. I did a search against a general Google search. Couldn't find anything there. After wandering around a little bit, I did come up with the Maryland State Department of Education fact book for 2011-2012. And through some of the data tables there, I was able to then construct this sheet that I passed it around to people. There's about 20 copies of that, where it showed the net local appropriations, the MOE required for each of the counties in the city of Baltimore, and then also the total enrollment for September 30, 2011. So I was then able to calculate the final two columns here, which are the per student amounts for net local appropriations for students and the MOE required for students. The second line of the table here is for Montgomery County, which is only exceeded by Worcester or Worcester County here in Maryland on a per capita basis. One thing you might note is that the net local appropriation amount and MOE required listed in this table for Montgomery County is only about 1.37 billion and 1.497 billion, far less than the 2 billion that we're looking at for the total MCPS budget.
Most of the difference is federal money.
Okay.
There's about 18 million from the state. We never get a fraction of what we send to Annapolis back. But federal money, lots of it.
So when you look at the per capita student amount, that does include that layer on top of this.
That's right.
So anyway, what we're looking at here anyway is even with just the net local appropriation, that in many cases Montgomery County is spending 2 to 3 times per student more than most of the other counties in the state here. So I guess we're getting 2 to 3 times better education for our kids.
Because that's overhead.
Yeah. But in my Google search for this information, I did come up with another interesting thing that last year, the Baltimore City School got caught inflating their numbers. And so they're ended up refunding about $3 million to the city of Baltimore government for correction on the numbers, which kind of raises a question somewhat about, since everybody keeps emphasizing how our school population is expected to increase by 25,000 in the next 5 years or something, how much of that is accurate or not? I mean, as I understand it from one parent that I know looked into it, in order to have kids counted as a dropout in the school system, they have to come in and formally register as a dropout. So if they don't formally register as a dropout, they're not counted, but they're not there. So there's part of perhaps where the enrollment gets inflated. I don't know. Just as Rob Sherman said, here's something for your consideration. Thank you.